the show, Pat was surprised by the fact that Pran was there. He just sort of like showed up and he was in front of him again, And we learn through the episodes and through the series that, whether Pat was ready to admit it or not, they were having like a flirting style of relationship. They've always sort of they've been in conflict, but they've also avoided conflict with each other, if that makes sense. After Pran saved Pa when she almost drowns, in the series it sort of didn't dive in that as much, but in the book it was quite an altering event, because until then this Pran, this neighbor that they had, was basically an evil person who would always do bad, and was only out for themselves because that's what they were taught, and that's why there was conflict. But when Pran sees Pa in distress, he doesn't think twice and he dives in the water and he tries to save her. And in the novel, it sort of dives deeper in that, in saying like the pond that she almost drowned in, um, it had the bank, but then it got quite deep really fast. And Pa and Pat were not allowed to go near the pond, so they shouldn't have been there in the first place. And they weren't allowed to go near the pond because neither of them were trained to swim. So that was the biggest thing. In the novel, Pa was on the back of Pat's bike, and while they were, verbally fighting, the bike rolled into the pond, and that's how she got it into it in the novel. In the series, they don't really explain how she got in the water, just that she was in the water. But in both, Pran, he completely stops the fighting and he goes and he saves Pa, not expecting anything in return, and that changes Pat, that changes Pa, and because he actually did that, that changes Pran as well. Even though Pran was never a bad person or anything, but it changed how he looked at his neighbors. Like, it changed how he looked at Pa and Pat, um, after he has saved her life. But like in the series, Pa says to Pat, she's like, "That day was I your sister," right? Like, saying, you didn't do anything to save me. And it doesn't really explain the situation at all. Whereas in the book, they made it very clear that he had no choice. He couldn't go in and save her. He would have just drowned himself because neither of them knew how to swim. So Pran was basically the only person there who could save her, and he did it. And because of that, it changed all three of the children, right? And it was a secret kept between all of them because, Pran could not admit to his parents that he had, you know, been there with them and saved Pa, even though they probably wouldn't have been upset about the fact that he saved another child, but they probably would have been upset at him that he saved that child because he risked his life to do it, right? Because there's always a risk. But it changed how the children looked at each other. So for Pa, after that, he was basically another brother, even though she couldn't, admit that she was even friendly with him. He was basically another brother. So she always worried about him. And they cover that in the novel and in the series quite well about how Pa is very concerned about Pran and saying to Pat, like, you can't fight him, you can't hurt him, you need to be there for him. Um, and that's, for her, it seemed obvious, like, that's what you have to do. Like, this man saved my life, so why are we at conflict with him? and she thought of him as a brother. And so that is sort of a theme that carries on. And I know in the beginning I was seeing a lot of people tweeting or a lot of people commenting saying like, is Pa interested in Pran? Like what is the deal? Like why is she behaving that way? And that's sort of why. And they do show that, he saved her from drowning in the series. But I think just because of how they did it, um, it wasn't necessarily obvious to everyone that that's why she was so concerned about it, because it wasn't that like she was in love with him or anything like that, because I mean people were saying that like, is she secretly in love with him, is she interested in him? And it's like, no, no, she thought of him as another brother, um, because of what he had done. So so that's sort of what that was about.